notification on your screen asking for your permission to let me record this so that we can disseminate it and send it out to folks who could not join us or are running a tad bit late. My name is Aditi Paul. Thank you so much for joining for this session. I'm just so excited for today. And I'm not going to be the person who's leading the show. It's going to be Akhila Kosaraju. She is going to be the host for today's session. And of course, our featured speaker is Samir Khedekar. So first, I'm going to introduce Akhila, and then I'm going to turn it on to Akhila to run the event for us. So Akhila Kosaraju is a recent graduate from the University of Michigan, where she completed her fully funded Masters of Design program post shifting her career from architecture and graduating from, hold your horses, IIT Kharagpur. She's a budding entrepreneur who's building a design agency for climate tech companies. She's currently on a self-employed OPT. She's also currently figuring out her pathways to immigration post her OPT, and she is going to be the moderator for the session. So thank you so much, Akhila, for leading us through this, and I'm looking forward to the event.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, and having me too. It's also super great to have Samir here. I'm going to introduce him really quickly, and then we can jump into questions. So Samir Khedekar is a nationally ranked visa lawyer specializing in tech companies. The author, and he's an author of his recent book, Unshackled, which is amazing, by the way, super engaging and fun to read, even though it's so value-packed. And he's the founder and managing attorney of Banyan, a global immigration law firm. Armed with a JD from Santa Clara University of Law, Samir's extensive experience includes collaborating with top national employers. And today, Samir is here for a fireside chat to explore the intricacies of merit-based visas, and particularly focusing on EB1 category. So for the first 40 minutes, we're going to kind of walk through stuff. I'll ask Samir some pre-submitted basic to advanced questions. And in the last 20 minutes, we can keep it for live Q&A, and you can get to ask him questions directly. So just to get started, I think, yeah, as an F1 student, I think this is like the first basic question. We have so many visa options to choose from after an F1. So how does someone decide which visa is the best for us?
Well, first I will say it's not always your choice, because most, like, the way the visa scheme has been written into a law is that the employer generally must sponsor you, right, for visas. And so, like, I guess your work is to find the job, and then kind of plug yourself into the system that the companies have. And I know this, having worked on the company side for many, many years with companies like Salesforce and EA and Autodesk and others. They have their kind of very, complex but solidified processes and policies around immigration. And they make these decisions as to which visa to sponsor you for based on generally cost and, ease of application and all that stuff, right? What makes the most business sense for them. And that's almost always the H-1B, right? At the end of the day, it's the most straightforward, most applicable visa for everybody. Just requires that you have a bachelor's degree and requires that your job be complex enough to require a bachelor's degree, which, everyone who graduates school is working in those jobs. So, and it's like, at the end of the day, probably the most cost effective. And then they'll do the H-1B, and then they'll plug you into their green card according to the immigration policy, and that's how it works. So I guess to answer your question, the trick is to be educated about that option, but also to understand what are your options if I don't get the H-1B, because that's something that they're not going to be thinking about. They just can't until the very, very end. And by that time, it could be too late, right? So your job, your work is to figure out, if I don't get the H-1B 2-3 years from now, how can I put myself in a position for another visa? And for most Indian nationals, I know there are more than just Indian nationals here, but for Indians, really the O1 visa is probably the only other option. You can't do a J1. TNs and other kind of country-specific visas won't work. So putting yourself possibly in a position for the O1, if you can, is probably your best proactive bet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Well, yeah, like even for O1 or EB1, just looking into it, there's just like so much information about it. Can you like share in a nutshell what it is and why there's so much like hype about it?
Well, I guess there's a lot of hype just to answer that question first because there isn't a quota, right? So like you're not like at least you feel like you're in control. Like if you qualify, you can go get it, right? You're not going to be subject to aspects that are outside of your control, like very low quotas, like the H1B has. So, um, and then with EB1, so everyone understand the difference. EB1 is for permanent residency, right? The O1 is for a work visa. So the O1 is more of the near-term solution to stay here and work here in the US. The EB1 is more of like the mid to longer term solution to be able to stay here, permanently, right? One generally does not go straight to EB1 because the process of getting, even if you qualify and you have an open and shut case, it takes 2, 3, 4 years for the whole process to unfold. That's not a near-term solution. It's not going to help you stay in the US after your OPT, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, right?
Yeah.
So you need that bridge. You need like the work visa, whether it's H1B or the O1, right? And so
Yeah.
just making sure we understand that difference. And then the hype is just because it's it's possible, right? It's a possible way to stay here and kind of chart your own course without being subject to a quota. They're similar in their requirements, not exactly the same, but similar in their requirements. I'm talking about the O1 and the EB1A,
Yeah.
right? The extraordinary ability, and that they require you to basically be at the very top of your field.
Yeah.
I would say the O1, the scrutiny on that is slightly less than the EB1, which is extremely high, right? There's more at stake for the EB1. Permanent residency is at stake, and the government's going to be super, super hard. But the O1s, like once you meet the minimum qualifications in our experience, like a lot of them get approved. The trick is to meet the minimum qualifications, especially if you're right out of school. That's something that could take a little bit of time.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. For both of these, like what's the process of getting started and completing, and like what role does like an attorney play in it?
Well, even before the attorney, remember, it's generally up to the company to decide to sponsor you for visas, right?
Yeah.
There are kind of other ways, read Unshackled, we kind of go through all this, but there are other ways to, self-sponsor an O1. They're very rare. And so right off the bat, you have to convince your company to sponsor you. And that's generally like, even if you qualify in your face, companies are reluctant to do O1s because we have HR professionals making these decisions. They don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to be seen as somebody who said, okay, we'll spend all the money on O1 for it not to work. They get very conservative and kind of frightened of the O1. Okay, so your job would be, number one, to build your profile such that you qualify, and then number two, either through you or your own attorney, put together a package to convince them, right, that you will qualify. Ultimately, they have to sponsor you, right? But if you convince them that you have all your ducks in a row, they'll take it to their attorney. Attorney would be like, yeah, we agree. And then that's how you would convince your company to do an O1. There are, around 10 requirements, for the O1, O1A. And you have to meet at minimum 3, and additionally show that you are, your presence here would benefit the US. You've reached national or international acclaim and that kind of thing. Things like playing a critical or essential role for your company or organization, judging on a panel of experts, competitions or peer review, things like that, authoring scholarly articles, winning national international awards, making a lot more money than most people in your field at any given time in your career. These are examples.
And the same thing for EB1, is there like a different set of skills?
It's very similar. Like, I don't know if we need to get into the distinctions between the two right now. Once again, they're spelled out in the book, but I would say that the main difference is that it's substantially harder. Like, the degree to which you have to convince an officer for the EB1 is much higher than it is for the O1. And the main reason for that is because, well, you're applying at different offices and they are hard at. They're just more of a hard asses. Nebraska Service Center and Texas Service Center, they just are. It's just a culture. I mean, not to say they aren't. Like California and Vermont, where the O1s go, but they're much worse for the EB1s. And the other reason being is because there's a second step to the analysis, something called final merits, or based on the Khedekar decision, right? It's implemented a lot more on the EB1 level than it is on the O1 level, which allows the officer to take a subjective look at your collective file, your whole file, like look at everything holistically. Does this person appear to me to be extraordinary? And that's when they can start like injecting their own kind of biases into the process, and to some extent they're allowed to other extent they overstep their bounds, but they do that a lot more at the EB1 level, which is why it's harder.
And what are some of like the common misconceptions that you've seen around EB1?
You have to have a PhD. You don't have to have a PhD. That's the misconception, is you have to have a PhD. The reality is you absolutely don't. Say it's a little easier if you're like on the research track and you're somebody like Aditi who's kind of more on that track. That's a more traditional EB1A, right? And the government too is very traditional in how they look at things. So they tend to like, maybe kind of in their minds, they think like that's what an EB1 is supposed to be too, but nowhere in the rules does it say that, right? So our firm, we do mostly EB1As for individuals with master's degrees who are working in high tech. That's just by virtue of where I'm located here in the Bay Area, and just the people that I've met over the years and the companies that I've worked with. That's just kind of how we just moved in that direction. But we also wanted to do away with the stigma that you have to have a PhD, because you don't. No, it's not easy. It's never easy, but it's possible. So that's like I think that's the biggest one.
Before we get more into EB1, can we touch a little bit on EB2 NIW? What is it, and what's the benefit of applying for it?
Yeah, so the EB2 NIW is the other way, in addition to the EB1A extraordinary ability, for you to self-petition for your green card. So you don't need a company to sponsor you, right? Or an organization to sponsor you.
Yeah.
So it's not as hard as EB1A. So that's the good thing about it. The bad thing is EB2. So if you're in a backlog category, it's not getting you a green card any faster than a traditional EB2. Okay. Now, what it does do for you, before we even get into what it is that it's because it's your I-140. Like every time, like it provides for a little bit more mobility or portability between jobs, right? Like if I'm working at company A, part of me doesn't want to keep changing companies. So every time I change, that company has to start a new perm and a new I-140, and now it's taking 2 years for each one. And what if my party date becomes current in the interim and I'm screwed, right? So the NIW gives you an I-140 that you can take with you wherever you go, and you don't need their I-140 anymore. You have your own, right? And so that gives you a little bit more flexibility in your career options, right? Because you're not relying on the perm and the I-140, right, in your next employer. So that's a good thing. The national interest waiver basically is a petition where it requires you to prove that, number one, you're working in an area that's intrinsically in the national interest, right? Almost everybody here can make that argument. It's not very difficult to do so. The hard part is the second step, which is to show that you particularly are well placed to advance a national interest more so than most people. That's the hardest prong to meet. And that's where you kind of have to show EB1A type stuff, although maybe not at the level of EB1A, but why are you a thought leader? Like, why are you more connected than others? Why are you, what is it in your background that actually we should let this person skip perm because they can actually do a lot for our country, and we don't want them to wait 2, 3, whatever years it is to go through the perm process, right? So that's what you have to prove in the second prong. And the third prong, for these reasons, they can, waive, you have to show a good reason why they should waive the perm for you. People that are starting companies can't do their own perm, right? Because you're starting your own company. How can you do a labor market test for your own company, right? So that's a good reason. How long perms are taken nowadays, 2 years, that's another good reason. So there are reasons that we can come up with. But that's essentially what the NIW is in a nutshell.
Nice. That's good to know. Out of So now getting more into EB1, out of the 10 criteria, how do you select which one to target?
So the minimum are 3. I would say you should go for 4 or 5 because you can meet the minimum 3 and they can say you've met 3, denied on final merits. That happens a lot. I had somebody denied after meeting 5 recently, which we are suing them because that was wrong. But you can see like how extensively they like to apply final merits. And in my limited, I'm not going to make sweeping allegations here, but in my limited view, they do that more to women than to men. So I've just seen that. I feel like maybe they wouldn't have, made those assertions with a similar profile if it was male, but that's just me. And so, which ones do you choose? You choose the ones that, in my opinion, you feel like we try to get as many as you can, but you need to do it in a way that's true to you and your career and your job and kind of your career path. You don't pick criteria just to check off boxes and then submit it to an officer saying, here, I qualify for the EB1, because that looks so disingenuous, right? And it destroys your overall credibility of your petition if you're not doing things that seem natural to you, right? And so what a lot of people, as they progress in their careers, they have a critical role. Like they are like super important for their company. And that's one that's a very common one to show. As they progress in their careers, they also tend to make, good money. And we usually have the ability to make good arguments that they can meet the remuneration category. So those are 2. And then think about, what fits you the best. A lot of people, they love writing. They love putting their, thoughts out there in the written form. They love influencing their field through, writing articles. And so that would be a great opportunity. That'd be a great one to pursue. It's just start writing, especially if that helps your career, right? It's probably a good thing for you. Judging is, generally for those in tech is the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, there's so many opportunities out there. The government rarely questions, judging. They'll give it to almost everybody, so long as you are judging competitions that are involving professionals that, anybody has the opportunity to. So not just within your company, but, or within your school, but, national level competitions, even if they're localized, but anybody can, participate, or peer review or things like that. So I'd say for tech, those are the 4 most common ones. And then the trick is like, how can I show I'm like, impacting my entire field? If you are somebody who can show that naturally, right, then you should really kind of figure out and speak with your attorney how you can make the original contribution argument. And then finally, I think I was lucky enough when I was in my last firm, when I was beginning as a lawyer, to have my boss at the time, who then became my partner, my last firm. She was so great because she would nominate me for all these awards at the time, and I didn't know like why she was doing that. And I realized that it would help her firm if like her attorneys had awards too. And so she would start the nomination process for us very, very early. And it's not that we didn't deserve it; we deserved the awards. But there are a lot of people who deserve the awards and nobody nominates them, right? Because it's 2 different things, right? So do that. Like, you deserve recognition for the work that you're doing, but are you getting the recognition, right? Yeah, go out and get that external validation, whether it's media or just awards and recognition, industry awards, things like that. There are those out there that you deserve, right? That don't seem calculated and fake, but they actually are real awards that people in your field win. And but for you trying to go get them, you could probably get them too, right? And if that's the case, go for those things. So I don't know, those are some examples. I would say membership, stay away from that. It never works for some reason. Like, one day I'd love to litigate why. They haven't accepted one membership as far as I know.
Okay. In all of these categories, how do we quantify our work? Like, for example, if we're demonstrating any critical or leading role, what kind of information do we need to provide in our petition in order to convince UCIS?
So the best evidence for critical role in your example would be letters from your supervisors, whoever is at the highest possible level who would agree to sign off on a letter. We generally help our clients draft those letters based on the content that they give us, and we there's a lot of back and forth there. When the theme is like you're either working in a leading or a critical role. It can be one or the other. It doesn't have to be both, right? And they're not the same thing. Because if you're working at like LinkedIn, that's a big company. Like you need to be leading, you need to be like VP level, or at the very least director level, to be leading at a company. Like it's just too big, right? But if you're at a startup and maybe you're one of, you're leading the engineering team and there's like 5 employees, right? Then you can do leadership role, right? Because the company's smaller. If you can't show leadership, then it's critical role, right? And so in that case, you need to show that the work you're doing, and it's not just team is doing this, but you are doing it, right? It's you are responsible for helping the company meet a goal that's mission critical for its success. And we generally translate that to their financial objectives, right? And business objectives. Okay. And not only are you solely responsible for helping that company meet that kind of mission critical goal, but it's very difficult for anybody. There's nobody else in the company who's doing it, and there's a reason why it's you and not somebody else in the company. Like you're not just a fungible part that they can put somebody else in do the same thing, right? There are usually ways that we can show that. That's generally the case. That's generally true. That's what happens in a lot of our clients' cases. That's exactly what happens. You'd have to be able to describe that well in the course of the letter from your supervisor.
Is there any other form apart from letters from a supervisor? Like how do they verify things?
Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of other kind of instances of evidence that really everyone has a different way of showing this. Maybe they have co-author patents for the company in a way that's not very common. Like maybe they have more patents than others, right? Maybe they've won some pretty prestigious internal company awards and received recognition, received bonuses and other kind of compensation, in response to their work that's uncommon for people in their field, kind of in their role at the company. So there are different ways that you can show that. Yeah. But the primary way are really good letters.
And out of all of this, how do we know what qualifies and what doesn't for evidence for EB1? Like in case of like media mentions as well. How do you know what's reputable? Like what's the benchmark here?
Yeah, it's a fuzzy one. There's what the regulations say, which are very just vague, right? And then there's how the government interprets the regulation. And the government is constantly changing and moving the goalposts. So there isn't like a right answer to that. I mean, I just think you would need to get assessed, with somebody who does a lot of EB1, with an attorney that does a lot of EB1s, and they should tell you, what works, what doesn't. Generally, let's say for media, you have to so you have to be covered, right, by the media. It can't be just your work is being described, in the media, but you're not mentioned. Like it has to be about you. It has to name you. It has to be about you. Like a mere quote's not going to be enough, right? Like the profile has to be on you, and it has to be about your work in the field that you are applying under. Number one, and then number two, it needs to be, and we're seeing a lot of the pushback on this now. It can't be just like, I go to a PR firm, they write something up for me, and then they send it to their buddies at some location honestly nobody's ever heard of. It doesn't go through an editorial process, but it's online, and so therefore, those are just getting absolutely demolished right now at the USCIS, and a lot of people are doing it. And USCIS is changing their approach to the media category because of that right now as we speak in real time. And so this is an example of like steps that large populations of people take that will affect EB1s for like future applicants, right? Because now they're suspicious of everybody going to the media, whereas before maybe they weren't as much, right?
Yeah.
So you need to show that you're it's kind of an organic process. And what is organic? I mean, everybody, like lots of people go out and get media coverage. If you have a startup, you retain a PR firm, like it's normal to get PR coverage, but it should be in a reputable place. And it should be somewhere that's like not so easy to get into. And if you can't do it, then don't worry about the media category. Like that's not for you, right? But you should try to get your media coverage into a location, TechCrunch or Wired or other locations where it's really easy to show that there's an editorial process, right? And there's editorial staff and committees, and they're selective about who they choose to coverage. It's true journalism, right? As opposed to marketing pieces, right? That's once again fuzzy gray line, but you have to understand where the government's coming from.
And if say in the case of non tech focused, if there's like a specific sector where you're doing, and there's like a specific media company that not everyone from a general population knows about, but is famous within a particular field, how do you make the case that it's a reputable source?
The regulations allow for you to submit media coverage, from trade journals, for example, or other major media. That's a very legitimate argument to make. Like, I work in a very niche area. You don't know about this. You haven't heard about this, location. But they're very, well known within our field. They're very respected, right? So that's where you just need to make the case for it. And the challenge is to get USCIS to actually spend the time to understand what you're making the case for. But so long as you can make the case, then you have, a legitimate reason to win that category.
And in general, how many of these is recommended?
So I get that question. How many can you get? Like, I mean, if you want to make the best possible case forward, like, put the best possible case to the government, like, what does that number look like to you? Like, I'm just going to put that back on to the people that ask me. Like, there isn't a number. Like if you were an officer looking at your overall package, so you're asking me how many media, not you, but this is a question I get a lot, right? So I'm not trying to focus on you here, even though you are like now the target of all what I'm saying here. But like, if you were looking at, you asked me at the media, how many media articles should I get? I'll ask you, what does your overall holistic package look like, right? What do you think would look good if an officer looked at everything holistically? What number does look good to you there, right? So there is no right answer. Remember, this is like an impression you're making. It's like you're applying to college. Like, how many, I don't know what the analogy is here, but how many extracurriculars do you need to get in to Harvard? Like, it's the whole overall package, right? And so that's what you have to focus in on, is how do I do that naturally and organically? Because that's what creates the most genuine, authentic, and impressive petition.
And okay, so you've started the process. Great, you've submitted everything. What happens if you have to switch jobs when you're applying for an EB1A? And how does it affect your profile?
Well, an EB1A is a self-petition. So that's a very good question, because like if you're in the regular EB2 process, employer-based, like employer-sponsored process, or the visa process, changing your jobs like has a real effect, right? Like, because then you have to start all over. It could invalidate the prior process, and there's a real ramification to that. But with the EB1A, if you're sponsoring yourself, there are no ramifications. It doesn't matter. And what it can do, it actually can be good, because if you're going to a much better role, let's say you're going from company A where you're making a good salary and you have a good critical role case. Now you go to company B where it's even better. Now you have two critical role arguments, and you have two remuneration arguments, right? So it actually could help you in many ways.
And so in all of this process, the big question, I think, is how do we know our profile is enough? How do you, like, obviously you have to work with an attorney, but while you're in the process of strategizing for building your profile before you get on board with an attorney, how do you set that benchmark for yourself?
If you can look at 4 or 5 different categories and you can say, I think I have arguments here. See, the hard part is like you have to understand what the categories are, right? And how are you supposed to know that when you don't do this every day, right? Like this is not your genius, that's your expertise, right? And you're all extremely smart people, but the laws are written illegibly sometimes, and so it's like smart people can misinterpret what the government intends to require, right? So one of the mistakes people make is like original contribution. They conflate that with critical role. They think, oh, if I'm having an impact, oh, I've had such an impact on my company, that's original contribution, right? But that's not original contribution is impact on your field, right? It's very hard for those in tech to show original contribution because all the work you're doing is for the benefit of one company, right? And it's proprietary to them, right? So the number one, you need to have a very good advanced understanding of each category, which is why we described that at length in Unshackled. Understand what the requirements are, and then if you feel like you can make a good argument in 3, 4, or 5 categories, you may not be right, but if you feel like, wow, I really think this might work, and look at the examples that we put in Unshackled, and a lot of the examples that Aditi posts about all the time on LinkedIn, right? Look at how people have done in the past, and then really be true to yourself. Be honest with yourself. Do I at least have an argument, right? I really feel good about maybe these 3, 4, or 5 categories. Then I think you have a good shot at being ready. Most people I talk to are good in like 2, and need help with 2 to 3 others, which is why we started a course to help people get there, to understand kind of what they can do, right, to help get there, because it's definitely a gap in kind of like the services that are out there. So, but it's not easy. It does. I mean, at the risk of just sounding self-serving, you do need a professional assessment. Okay, it really helps to hear from people because this is a legal process. You have to like apply your background to the laws, and so that's what lawyers do.
Yeah. And lastly, just before jumping into opening up for Q&A, what are some of the big risks that someone should know of before getting started with this process?
With the EB1 process?
Yeah.
Risks. I mean, it can be costly. I think it's more about like know what you're getting yourself into, okay? Because I am a huge proponent of EB1s for Indian nationals, not just because I think Indians are the only ones. It's just because you have the longest backlogs, right? Like, just it's not fair, but that's what it is right now.
Yeah.
But that being said, you need to have the proper expectations about what the process is like. It's bloody, it's a battle, it's unfair. The government sometimes doesn't read what you submit, or they selectively parse out things that they can use to make the case against you. Like this idea that the government is an objective, kind of fair, kind of adjudicating body is completely wrong. For the most part, they're not your friend. Like the culture within Nebraska Service Center, I know I've spoken to attorneys who used to work there. If you come across as being a little too easy on the applications, that hurts their career there. Like it's a culture, it's just implicit in working there is to be hard on immigrants, right? Sometimes that means they do things illegally. So understand that this process is it's an all-out battle, it's an all-out fight, right? And it may not work the first time, and it's not your fault, and it's not your lawyer's fault. It's just because it's unfair, and then you have to persevere. You may have to get some more evidence and refile. We get a lot of approvals upon refiling, by the way, or you sue, right? Because the government is being ridiculous, and we get a lot of approvals after, we file. I can show you a screenshot later on, but when we sue, within 2 months, they have to respond to the lawsuit. What almost always happens is that they reopen the EB1 because they acknowledge they did a bad job, and then they issue a request for evidence, and then you respond to that, then they approve it. So that's also a very common process. So understanding like it's just a crazy, difficult process, I think would save you from a lot of heartache. And I think you should have that expectation going in.
Yeah. No, this is super helpful, and thanks for taking the time to do all of this. Let's move on to individual questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I can call you over, and you can ask your own question. Please try to be mindful of not taking up too much time. We're trying to get as many questions answered in the next 20 minutes as possible. But yeah, I see Vaishnavi Hatrote.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my question here.
Vaishnavi, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
While Vaishnavi comes on, I see a whole bunch of folks like putting in comments of connecting with each other. We do have this doc file. Please feel free to put your details and connect with each other. These are all folks who are applying for their EB1. So I've dropped it in the chat. That's a networking spreadsheet. Feel free to enter your details. All right, Vaishnavi.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So my question is, considering your achievements are based out of India and not in the US, and they are almost about to be 4 to 5 years old achievements, I would say, but they're kind of credible. Would that still stand a case for EB1A?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the achievements can occur anywhere in the world. They can be national or international. That doesn't matter. They just have to be achievements wherever they're located. But the other part of the EB1A is that your achievements must be sustained, and they will use that against you. So if you have, you know, a bunch of articles, for example, that you authored in 2016, but nothing since then, that's going to hurt your case because they want to see kind of like a relatively consistent, you know, flow of work and achievements over the course of time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna pick out 3 people so that you can stay ready. Next is Sunil, then Akash, and then Hari.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My question is for high salary criteria, what should be the top, like it should be top 5%, top 10%, or top 1%?
Once again, the government
Yeah.
is not very consistent on this. The benchmark we use is top 10% or 90th percentile of kind of what senior people in your field make in your location. I'm not saying it has to be that, but if it is that, we feel like we can make a pretty good argument.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Akash.
Yeah. Hey, Samir, thanks again for doing this session. Super helpful, especially with the know what you're getting yourself into part. My question to you is, I'm currently on an O1 just looking to see how I can cover the gap for an EB1. And on the USCIS website, I saw a section which says evaluating petitions filed on behalf of O1 non-immigrants, and where they say that you have to provide more justification if you want to deny that petition. So does having it help, or I know it's just judged as the same as any other application, like from the ground zero, but does having that make a difference in terms of rejection, or like, could you expand more on that, please?
I'd say it makes very little difference in practice. Maybe like a 0.5% of kind of a favorable impression on the officer. Like, oh, this person has an O1, it kind of makes sense to go to EB1. But I think as in practice, I've seen a very little practical effect or benefit.
I see 2 Haris. Is this the same person?
I mean, I can go first.
Let's do Hari with the video first, and then we'll do Hari without the video after.
Okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Amir. Thanks, everyone on the call, like, for hosting this. And you know, so my question is, like, so during the profile building stage, So I'm targeting EB1 and so I'd be starting my master's at Columbia University. So during the profile building stage, what would be the right time to seek advice from an immigration counselor or advisor?
It depends on the lawyer. I think different lawyers have different kind of service offerings, right? Some just want you to be, they're not going to like really talk to you, or they may talk to you, but they're not going to take your case until you're ready to go for an EB1 petition. Others can do, consultations to help you kind of give feedback to you as you build your profile. Others like us, we have courses to help you kind of meet that gap or bridge that gap.
Got it. Yeah. Just a quick follow-up to that, if that's okay. So I'm targeting, so I'd like to work in the aerospace industry after my MS, which is one of the most brutal and stringent industries when it comes to immigration rules for international students. So I'm wondering, are there any, so there's something called ITAR, which stands for International Traffic and Arms Regulation. So companies like SpaceX and many of the NASA centers allow only US citizens and permanent residents to work. So I'm wondering if there are any aerospace specific lawyers who could evaluate my profile and comment on that, or they're just general lawyers like yourself who would be able to give an overall picture of my caliber and prowess.
Yeah, I don't think aerospace is a specialty within immigration. I mean, there are lawyers who. SpaceX was my client a long while ago, actually, a long time ago. As was Boeing. There are lawyers and law firms who have worked in the aerospace industry, so they may get. But at the end of the day, it makes very little difference if you have experience in your specific field. Maybe they can give you a couple pointers here and there. But as for an EB1, some of the things that make it aerospace hard for you don't necessarily apply to, or lawyer can't really add any more value to an EB1 for you just based on those factors.
Got it. Thank you.
Next we have Hari Prasad, Appy, and then Ami. We can't hear you, Hari. While you figure that out, let's Appy, I think you can go, and then Hari can come in after.
Okay, great. Hi, Samir. Thank you for a great informative talk. I put it in the chat too. I'm a PhD student graduating soon, and I'm wondering if I have publications or patents that come out of my PhD and they get talked about within like NYU's website and NYU media. Is that counted as something that could be used toward your immigration petition profile, or is that not a good enough?
I mean, well, in what way though, right? Is that media? Like, are we checking off the media box? And maybe not, because the media is restricted to maybe. I have to kind of take a look specifically. But generally, kind of coverage by your schools, like newspaper or website, is not good enough to count as media for EB1 purposes. But what it does is it can be evidence to show the impact of your research, right? And be like, the government hates letters for original contribution. They're not supposed to, but they do. That's a separate story. What they love to see is other primary evidence. So like when they see coverage by the school or just other kind of like documentary evidence that you're moving a body of research forward, right? That's a great way to show a richer contribution. So it does absolutely help, just not in the ways you might think.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Samir, on that topic, I'd be curious to know about like the original contribution. Like, why is it that USCIS or the government doesn't want letters to support original contribution? Why is that?
They view letters as biased and not probative to the impact. They feel anybody who's writing a letter for you wants you to get an EB1, so they are inherently biased, right? And so they have a bias against what they perceive to be the bias in the letters. So for critical role, it's very hard to show critical role without letters. So they kind of begrudgingly accept letters as primary evidence there. But for original contribution, they kind of that's where they put the foot down, like, and they want to see something more objective. Now there are two AAO cases that instruct them to do otherwise, precedent cases, and we throw that into every one of our EB1s and RFPs, and sometimes they read it, sometimes they don't. But that's a kind of example of the kind of battles that we get into with them. Because if and the cases say if the letters are not contradicting, any other evidence in the file, and there's no reason not to believe what's in the letters, then you have to believe them, right? But they don't like to do that.
Hari, are you ready?
Sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, thanks, Akila. Thanks, Samir and Aditi, for this session. So I'm trying to build my profile for O1 on the founders side of it. So I'm currently on my F1 OPT. So this question is more of the F1 OPT question. So is it possible that I can do a side business and make money while I was on F1 OPT? Because I know that we can do multiple jobs on F1 OPT, but can I work for a corporate company and also run a startup at the same time?
OPT to be distinguished from STEM OPT.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So on OPT, yes, you can, as long as the work is related to your degree. You can pretty much do whatever work you want to within that field, or however many jobs you want to within that field, paid or unpaid.
I can make money from the startup, right? My own startup in that
Yes,
case.
you can. Yes, under OPT.
Okay.
It gets a little tricky when you transition to STEM OPT. Not that you can't do that, but that's when the question of employer-employee relationship arises. And that's a little bit more of a, stickier situation.
Okay. Thanks. So if I have any questions regarding this, can I contact you on LinkedIn?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ami.
Hi, Samir. Thank you for the informational session. I have a couple of questions. So one, like having a patent which has not yet been commercialized, does that add value to EB1A profile, or like is it necessary to have it commercialized by someone?
Can you, I mean, not that I don't know what it means. I don't think I know what it means as well as you do. What do you mean by commercialized?
So
What's your
I was
definition?
I was working in a leather research institute and I have a patent, but that has not yet been picked up by leather industry because although it's sustainable, it's not economical on their pockets. So it's not yet been used for commercialization like process. So yeah, does that still add value to my EB1A profile?
So patents are most often put forth to help with original contribution, like that category, right? In order to win original contribution, your contribution has to be novel or unique, and it has to have a major impact on your field. So your patent sounds like it meets the first prong, but perhaps not the second one.
Second one.
So
Okay.
yeah, so you can, that being said, you would put it in there, like you would just talk about it, but you can't expect to win original contribution. But it does help with the overall final merits and the kind of the holistic, determination of your, your abilities and your accomplishments. But it won't help you win that category.
Right. Okay. And the second question that I have, like right now I'm on H1B cap exempt visa, the one for academic institutions. So I have dependent spouse on it. And while I'm applying for EB2 NIW and EB1A, is my spouse allowed to be on another visa like a E3 visa or a TN visa, which is a non-dual intent visa?
I can answer very generally. You definitely need specific counsel for this to understand like the full,
Okay.
all the aspects of both of your files, right? I can't just like give you sweeping legal advice based on that question. However, generally at the EB1, at the 140 stage or the NIW stage, yes, he can be on, or they can be on a different visa, but you want to be careful about travel.
Okay.
For the E3 or for the TN or for some like the F1 or some sets of visas are not consistent with green card intent. And it could ding them if they travel. It's very general advice, but my biggest advice is talk to a lawyer about this.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Or talk to a lawyer at your institution who's helping you with the
Okay.
NIW and the EB1.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, we have Kaushal, Farheen, and after that, Sunil. Kaushal, you can go.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Samir and Aditi. Thank you for this session. So just a follow-up question on the EB2 NIW. If I have an existing EB2, to understand, you're saying that if I switch jobs and I have an EB2 NIW, the other employer will not have to repeat the whole process, and then I-140 stays with me?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's not similar to switching jobs on a standard EB2 where they would have to restart the whole process for I-140 all over again, regardless of the priority date being what it is.
Yeah, I mean, you keep the priority date, but you can
Sure.
only really keep it once the new company that you're working with has an approved I-140 for you. So that's why each one has to keep doing it over and over again.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Farheen?
Yes. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Samir, Aditi, for organizing this session. So I have a question regarding what is the wait period for EB1, EB2, and O1? Like, what is generally wait period? Currently, I'm on H1B, and it's highly like uncertain. You don't know. It's completely depend on your employer, and you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And this gives me like very much insecurity. So, like, what is the wait time for these categories?
You said you were on OPT right now?
No, I'm on H1B, and
You're on
I work
H1B?
as a lead data scientist for a global logistic company.
So, do you have an I-140 approved through your company?
No, so it was applied, but due to the situation of the market from past 6 months, I had to switch my role, and I had applied for I-140, but now I'm not on I-140, and I'm a current employer, cannot do it until a year. That's the policy.
Okay. Well, you generally, I mean, this is a kind of a more involved, answer. You want an EB2 or you want an I-140 approved through your company to extend your H1B, and that can take a couple of years, generally speaking. The EB1A, if successful, can take about 6 months to process with the law firm and with the government, maybe less, but on average. But then there will be are you from India or were you born in India?
Yes, I'm an Indian citizen.
But you were born in India?
Yes.
It's a difference sometimes.
I'm born in India.
Yeah. So there could be, even if you get an EB1 approved, there could be a 3-4 year backlog before you can apply for that 45. And then, and then the I-45 might take about a year and a half.
Okay.
We have 3 more minutes. I think we have 2 really quick questions that we can do next. Sunil, I think you can go next, and then after that it's demand.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have a follow-up question on the EB1 salary criteria. So you mentioned about the location. So what should be the location I should consider? Where I'm residing in New York, where my IT company is in like New Jersey, or where my client is in Atlanta?
Usually it's where are you physically sitting.
Okay, New York City.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.
Demand.
Thank you, Samir, for a very useful session. I have a quick question. So it's regarding choosing the right field and niche for building the EB1 profile. So basically, let's say I'm working in data science field. So if I switch jobs, especially when 15, 17 years experience is very diversified, like earlier experience in software engineering and then move to data science AI, and now working in AI in cybersecurity. But let's say if I switch job over this time to some other domain like telecommunication or healthcare, because I don't know what my next job would be in what domain, right? But the one thing that's gonna stay with me is like artificial intelligence or data science. So how should I choose the niche for this EB1 category?
So as far as the EB1 goes, what we try to do is we try to find that through line between all of your work and accomplishments that number one allows us to include all of the accomplishments and doesn't exclude them. And then number two, creates, this pond, hopefully a small pond that you are the biggest fish in, right? So finding the right balance between the two. that is a discussion we often spend entire sessions talking about that with our clients. But that would be kind of the goal, is to make sure that we don't exclude, any of the accomplishments that you have in the past by choosing a certain field, right? That's not relevant to those accomplishments. So what is the through line? What is the commonality?
Okay.
What is that field, that new field, kind of the nascent field that you're beginning to work in?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And the original contribution that we say, right? I mean, that is usually for industry professional, it's owned by the patents are owned by the company. Will that counts towards me, or that's not helpful? Although my name would be in inventor list, or I mean,
Well, remember, if who's benefiting from the patent? Is it the company or your entire field?
Okay.
If it's a company, then it's not original contribution.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we're at time here. So thank you all so much. I think you can add some of the questions into the chat if Aditi wants to send them over to Samir after. But this was super useful. And I'm really glad that this was so accessible to everyone as well. Over to Aditi if you have anything else to add.
Thank you again so much, Akhila and Samir. This was not intended to be all questions get answers event. It will never be that. That's what I've understood. But if we can take a couple of minutes to please thank Samir and Akhila for their efforts in making sure that everybody's questions get answered, and in a depth that I could only have hoped for as I was going through this process. So can we take a minute to please thank Samir and Akhila in the chat? I will send out the recording as well as folks' LinkedIn's, as well as the Slack community we have. If you want to get one or two questions answered, there are multiple folks over there, all non-legal advice. We are trying to help each other out to the best of our abilities, going to different lawyers and bringing it back, what I've heard, what we have learned from our experience. So all of that is going on in the Slack community. So if you want to join, please come and join. Next Saturday, we are doing an event with an global immigration specialist called Florencia Escobar. So if you are an international student and if you would like to know what goes on when your employer is trying to or not trying to petition for your H-1B, what goes on in that HR domain, please join us next Saturday, because that's what we're going to be talking about. But Samir, final thoughts. You are the man of the house today.
No, thank you, everybody. It was really a pleasure, speaking with all of you today. Thank you, DT. Thank you, Akhila. It was a lot of fun. Just to follow the thoughts of Unshackled. Don't underestimate the fact that the systems is not really designed to help you, but there are things that you can do. If you take charge of your life, if you take charge of your immigration destiny, you can make things happen. So have the mentality where you make it happen. Don't wait for things to happen to you.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you so much, Samir. I'll send the recording out to everybody, and I'll see you at the next event. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.